The city hummed like a machine that never slept. Cars honked, people rushed, and tall buildings stood like silent judges watching over the chaos below. Inside one of those buildings, high above the noise, a man sat alone in a quiet office. He wasn't used to silence. His life was full of meetings, calls, decisions that moved millions of dollars with a single signature. But today something felt off. Not wrong, just heavy. He'd been working on a deal for months. $200 million. Enough money to buy small islands or fund hospitals. To most people it was unimaginable. To him it was just another line on a spreadsheet until it wasn't. Lately the numbers had started to blur. The faces of the people on the other side of the table seemed too eager, too smooth. Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. He told himself he was being paranoid. After all, he'd built his company from nothing. He knew how to spot a lie, didn't he? Still, the pressure was building like steam in a kettle. He needed air. Not the filtered, climate-controlled kind from his office vents, but real air. Smelling of rain, coffee, maybe a little exhaust. So he did something unusual. He left his office without telling anyone. No assistant, no security, no entourage. Just him in a plain dark coat, walking down the street like any other person. A few blocks away, tucked between a bank and a bookstore, was a small coffee shop called Haven Brews. It wasn't fancy. No gold-plated espresso machines or baristas with tattoos spelling out philosophical quotes. Just warm light spilling onto the sidewalk, the rich smell of roasted beans and the soft clink of cups. He'd passed it 100 times but never gone in. Today he pushed the door open. Inside it was cozy. Wooden tables, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard with daily specials written in looping handwriting. A few people sat with laptops or books. No one looked up when he entered. No one recognized him. And for the first time in weeks he felt invisible, in a good way. He stepped up to the counter. Behind it stood a young woman, maybe early 20s, with tired eyes but a calm presence. Her name tag read Maya. She wore a simple green apron and had her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She smiled. Not the wide, practiced smile of someone trying to impress, but a small, genuine one, like she was happy to see another human being. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Black coffee." "Large," he said, his voice a little rough from disuse. She nodded and turned to the machine. As she worked, he found himself watching her hands, steady, quick, sure of themselves. He realized he was tense. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched. Without thinking, he did something he often did when he was anxious. He tapped his index finger twice on the counter. Quick, sharp. A habit he'd picked up years ago during late-night negotiations. It was his way of saying, "Hurry up. I don't have time." But the moment his finger hit the wood the second time, the young woman paused. She didn't turn around right away. She finished pouring the coffee, set the cup down gently, then looked at him. There was no judgment in her eyes, just curiosity. "That's the wrong trick," she said softly. He blinked. "What?" She tilted her head slightly. "That finger tap, it's not quite right." He stared at her, confused. No one had ever said anything about that little habit before. Most people didn't even notice it. "What do you mean?" She wiped her hands on her apron, thinking. "My dad used to do magic tricks. Real ones, not just pulling rabbits out of hats, but sleight of hand, illusions. He taught me that every move has a purpose. If you do it wrong, even by a little, it gives you away, like if you're trying to distract someone, but your hand moves too fast or too slow, they notice. The trick fails." She looked at his finger, then back at his eyes. "Your tap, it's not relaxed. It's stiff. Like you're forcing it. So instead of hiding your impatience, it screams it." He didn't know what to say. No one spoke to him like this. Not in years. Everyone around him was careful, polished, always measuring their words. But this young woman, barely out of college, probably working this job to pay rent, had just seen something about him that his closest advisors hadn't. He felt a strange mix of embarrassment and relief. Like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. "You're right," he said quietly. "I didn't even realize I was doing it." She handed him the coffee. "We all have our tells. My dad used to say the real magic isn't in fooling people, it's in seeing them clearly." He took the cup. It was warm in his hands. "Thanks." "No problem," she said, already turning to the next customer. But then she glanced back. "Hope your day gets lighter." He walked to a corner table, sat down and sipped the coffee. It was good, strong, but not bitter. As he drank, his mind kept circling back to her words. It screams it. Was that what he'd been doing with the deal? Trying so hard to look in control that he'd missed the warning signs? He pulled out his phone, opened the file for the acquisition, and started reading again. This time slower. He noticed things he'd skimmed over before. A line about undisclosed partnerships. A vague reference to future revenue streams with no backup data. The lead engineer's name was missing from the team photo on their website. Small things. But together, they felt like cracks in a wall that looked solid from far away. He thought about the other side of the deal, the people he'd been negotiating with. They'd been smooth, yes. Too smooth. They'd agreed to his terms almost too quickly. No pushback. No real debate. In his world, that was rare. Usually deals were fought over like prize fighters in a ring. But this one had felt easy. Too easy, and he'd been so eager to close it. To prove, to himself, to the board, to the world, that he still had it. That he wasn't slowing down. Maybe that eagerness had blinded him. He finished his coffee and stood up. As he walked back to the counter to toss the cup, Maya was wiping down the espresso machine. "Good coffee?" she asked without looking up. "The best I've had in a while," he said honestly. She smiled. "Glad to hear it." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. If you saw someone rushing into something big, something important, but you thought they might be missing something, what would you do?" She stopped wiping and looked at him. "I'd ask myself, are they listening? Or just waiting to talk?" He nodded slowly. That was it, wasn't it? He'd been so focused on getting the deal done, on hearing the answers he wanted, that he hadn't really listened. "Thanks," he said again. "No charge," she replied with a small laugh. He left the coffee shop and stepped back into the city noise, but something had shifted. The weight was still there, but it felt different. Less like a burden, more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Back in his office, he called off the final signing scheduled for that afternoon. His assistant was shocked. "Sir, the board is expecting this to close today. The press release is ready." "I know," he said, "but we're not signing anything until I've reviewed every single document again, with fresh eyes." There were murmurs of concern, but he held firm. That night, instead of going home, he stayed late. He read contracts he'd skimmed before. He called old contacts in the tech world, asked quiet questions. He even dug up old news articles about the startup's founders. One name kept coming up, a researcher who'd left the company suddenly with no explanation. By 3 a.m., his desk was covered in notes, and a cold feeling settled in his stomach. Something wasn't right, but he didn't act on it yet. He needed to be sure, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't trusting his gut alone. He was listening to the details, to the silence between the words, to the small voice in a coffee shop that had reminded him what it meant to really see. The next morning, he returned to Haven Brews. It was raining lightly and the streets glistened. The shop was quieter this time. Only a couple of customers. Maya was behind the counter, restocking pastries. She looked up when the bell rang. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, but she didn't seem surprised. "Back so soon?" she asked. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said," he admitted. She poured him another black coffee, no need to ask, and slid it across the counter. "About the trick?" "About seeing clearly." She leaned on the counter, lowering her voice. "My dad lost everything once. Trusted the wrong person, said the paperwork looked perfect, the numbers added up, but something in his gut said no. He ignored it. Paid for it," he nodded. "I think I might be standing where he stood." She didn't offer advice, didn't tell him what to do, just said, "Then trust the part of you that's asking the question." He stayed for 20 minutes, sipping coffee, watching raindrops slide down the window. When he left, he felt calmer, not certain but clear. That afternoon, he ordered a full forensic audit of the startup. Not just the financials, but the tech, the team, the history. It would take days. The board would be furious. The other side would panic. But he didn't care anymore because he finally understood. The biggest risk wasn't losing the deal. It was closing it for the wrong reasons. And it all started with a wrong trick and a young woman who dared to say so. The morning after his second visit to the coffee shop, the billionaire sat at his desk with a cup of black coffee, bought from a machine in the office kitchen this time, not Haven Brews, and stared at the wall of screens in front of him. One showed live stock prices. Another, a countdown to the scheduled signing of the $200 million deal. The third displayed a folder labeled Nexicor, Final Due Diligence. He hadn't opened it yet. Not really. He'd skimmed it weeks ago, satisfied with the surface. Now he clicked it open like it might bite him. He started reading from the beginning. Not fast. Not like before when he'd rushed through pages just to check a box. This time he read every sentence, every footnote, every disclaimer buried in tiny print. And the more he read, the more his stomach tightened. At first it was small things. A mismatch in dates, when the company claimed to have filed a patent versus when the actual filing appeared in public records. A gap in the employment history of one of their top engineers. Then there was the financial statement. On the surface it looked strong. Growing revenue, low overhead, clean balance sheet. But when he dug into the notes, he saw that nearly 60% of their revenue came from a single client, an obscure shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. No website. No public presence. Just a name and a bank account. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Shell companies weren't illegal. Big businesses use them all the time for tax strategy or privacy. But this one, it felt off. Too convenient, too quiet. He picked up his phone and called his head of legal, a woman who'd worked with him for 15 years and never sugarcoated the truth. I need you to pull everything you can on a company called Oceanic Horizon Holdings, he said. There was a pause. That's the entity tied to Nexicor's main revenue stream, right? Yes, and I want to know who's behind it. Real names. Not nominees. Not layers of LLCs. I want the person at the end of the chain. I'll get on it, she said. But is everything okay? Not sure yet, he admitted. But I'd rather look paranoid than stupid. He hung up and opened another file, this one containing emails from the last round of negotiations. He scrolled through them slowly. The Nexicor team had been responsive, polite, eager to please. Too eager. Every question he'd asked, they'd answered within an hour. Every concern, smoothed over with perfect reassurance. No pushback. No hesitation. In his experience, that wasn't how real innovation worked. Real tech founders were passionate, sometimes stubborn, often defensive about their work. These people? They acted like salespeople selling a car, not builders protecting a dream. He remembered something Maya had said. Are they listening? Or just waiting to talk? These people hadn't been listening. They'd been performing. His assistant knocked softly on the door. Sir, the board is asking for an update. They're confused about the delay. Tell them I'm reviewing final risk assessments, he said, and that I'll brief them by end of day. She hesitated. The chairman called twice. He said, this deal is non-negotiable, that the market is watching. He sighed. Then let the market watch me do my job. After she left, he called his chief technology officer, a quiet man who rarely spoke in meetings but whose judgment he trusted more than anyone's. I need you to look at Nexicor's demo again, he said. Not the polished version they showed us. The raw code they shared during due diligence. The one they claimed was pre-release. Yes, run it through our validation suite. Check for originality. See if it matches anything in public repositories. There was a long silence. You think it's stolen? I don't know. But I need to be sure. I'll get my team on it right away. As the day wore on, more pieces began to surface. His legal team found that Oceanic Horizon Holdings shared a registered agent with 3 other companies, all of which had been involved in failed tech acquisitions over the past 2 years. Each time the target company collapsed shortly after the deal fell through, leaving investors with nothing. No lawsuits, no headlines, just quiet disappearances. Then, late in the afternoon, the CTO called back. His voice was grim. The algorithm they showed us? It's nearly identical to a research project published 2 years ago by a team at a university in Finland. The paper was open source. They just repackaged it, added a flashy interface, called it their own. The billionaire closed his eyes. How close? 92% match in core logic. They changed variable names, shuffled a few functions, but the architecture? It's the same. He didn't say anything for a full minute. $200 million. For a copy-paste job dressed up as innovation. And worse, he realized with a sinking feeling, 2 members of his own board had quietly invested in Oceanic Horizon. He'd seen the names in an old email chain, buried under layers of forwards. He'd ignored it then, assuming it was standard cross-investment. Now it looked like collusion. He stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, glittering in the late sun. From up here everything looked orderly, controlled, but down in the streets, in coffee shops and classrooms and small offices, real people were working, creating, trusting, and someone had decided to gamble with that trust for profit. He thought about Maya again. She'd seen through his little finger tap not because she was clever, but because she'd been taught to pay attention to truth, not performance. Her father's magic wasn't about fooling people. It was about revealing something real through illusion. And here he was, almost falling for the oldest trick in the book, making something look valuable when it wasn't. He called an emergency meeting. Not with the full board, too risky. Just his inner circle, legal, finance, tech, and his most trusted advisor. A woman who'd been with him since the company was run out of a garage. When they gathered in the secure conference room, he didn't waste time. "We're not closing the deal," he said flatly. The CFO frowned. "We've already announced the intent to acquire. Pulling out now will tank our stock." "Better a dip than a crater," he replied. "Nexicor's tech is plagiarized. Their revenue is fake, and 2 board members are tied to the shell company funding it." Silence fell like a stone. The legal head spoke first. "Do we have proof?" "Enough to halt the deal." "Not enough to sue yet, but I'm not signing anything until we do." His tech lead nodded. "I've preserved all code comparisons, time-stamped, encrypted." "Good." He turned to his advisor. "What's the fallout if we walk away?" "Short-term? Angry investors. Confused analysts. Maybe a 10% drop in share price. Long-term, we look cautious, not reckless. And if this blows up later, which it will, we'll be the ones who saw it coming." He exhaled. "Then we walk, but it wasn't that simple." Within hours, rumors started swirling. A financial news site posted a vague headline: "Viridian Dynamics pauses $200 million AI acquisition amid internal review." By evening, the Nexicor CEO called him directly. "Is there a problem?" The man asked, voice smooth as ever. "Just dotting I's and crossing T's," he replied, matching the tone. "We've been transparent from day one," the CEO said. "Our team is ready to move forward." "I'm sure they are," he said. "But my team needs more time." There was a pause. Then softer. "You know, delays like this, they make people nervous. Our investors are asking questions." "Let them ask," he said, and ended the call. That night he couldn't sleep. He paced his apartment, replaying every meeting, every email, every handshake. Had he missed the signs because he wanted to believe? Because he needed a win? The company had faced criticism lately. Slow growth, aging products. This deal was supposed to be the spark, the comeback. And maybe that's why he'd ignored the red flags. Not because he was blind, but because he was desperate. He thought about the young cashier again. She didn't have billions. She didn't run a company. But she had something he'd lost. The courage to speak up when something felt wrong, even to a stranger. Even when it wasn't her place. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a personal note, not an email, not a memo, but a handwritten letter, to the head of his internal audit team. "Find the truth," he wrote. "Not the version that makes us look good. The one that keeps us honest." By noon, the audit team had uncovered more. The lead engineer who'd left Nexicor, she'd filed a whistleblower complaint with a tech ethics group, alleging that the company pressured her to falsify test results. The complaint was sealed, but they found a reference in a deleted LinkedIn post. And the university in Finland? They'd sent Nexicor a cease and desist letter 6 months ago. It had been quietly settled. No admission of guilt, just a payment and a promise to collaborate in the future. It was all a house of cards. And he'd almost bought it. He called his legal team again. "Start drafting a termination notice for the acquisition agreement." "Cite material misrepresentation, are you sure?" his lawyer asked. "This could trigger lawsuits. Let them sue," he said. "I'd rather fight in court than lie to our shareholders." Then he did something else. He called Haven Brews. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Haven Brews, how can I help?" "It's the guy who comes in for black coffee," he said, suddenly awkward. "Is Maya working today?" "She's on break, but I can get her." A moment later, her voice came on the line. "Hello?" "Hi, it's me. From the coffee shop." "Oh, hey," she said, sounding surprised but not startled. "Everything okay?" "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" For reminding me to look. There was a pause. Then she said, "You figured it out, didn't you?" "I'm figuring it out," he corrected, slowly. "But I'm looking." "That's all anyone can do," she said gently. They talked for just a few more minutes about nothing important, really. The weather. A new pastry they'd started selling. But it grounded him. In a world of spreadsheets and secret deals, her voice was real. Human. After they hung up, he sat at his desk and stared at the termination notice on his screen. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. And a little ashamed. Ashamed that it took a stranger's quiet observation to wake him up. Ashamed that he'd almost let pride override principle. But mostly he felt clear. He hit send. The message went to Nexicor's legal team, his board, and his executive team. One sentence. Viridian Dynamics hereby terminates the proposed acquisition of Nexicor Technologies, effective immediately, due to undisclosed material inaccuracies in representations provided during due diligence. Within minutes, his phone began to ring. Emails flooded in, some angry, some confused. One from the chairman of the board simply read, "We need to talk now." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window again. The city was dark now, lit by streetlights and office windows. Somewhere out there, a young woman was serving coffee, wiping counters, maybe studying for a class, and somewhere else a group of people were scrambling to cover their tracks. He took a deep breath. The deal was dead. The money was safe. But the real work was just beginning, rebuilding trust, fixing what was broken, learning to see again. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in it. The days after pulling out of the deal were loud, full of phone calls, emergency board meetings, and headlines that swung between visionary CEO avoids costly scam and Viridian leadership in chaos. But the billionaire didn't care about the noise anymore. What stayed with him wasn't the stock dip or the angry emails from investors. It was the quiet certainty in the voice of the young woman behind the coffee counter. She hadn't given him answers. She just reminded him how to ask the right questions. Still, something nagged at him. He'd stopped a bad deal, yes. But had he really changed? Or was he just reacting, still caught in the same cycle of pressure, pride, and panic, only this time with a different outcome? He needed to understand not just what went wrong with Nexicor, but what had gone wrong inside himself. And so, on a rainy Thursday evening, when the office was finally empty and the city lights shimmered through wet windows, he found himself walking back to Haven Brews. The shop was nearly closed. Only one other customer sat near the window, sipping tea and reading a book. The air smelled of cinnamon and damp wool. Behind the counter, Maya was wiping down the espresso machine, her movements slow and tired. She looked up when the bell above the door jingled and her eyes softened when she saw him. "You again," she said, not unkindly. "Am I overstaying my welcome?" he asked, half joking. She shook her head. "Coffee's still hot, and you look like you could use it." He smiled faintly and sat at the same corner table as before. She brought over a cup without asking, black, large, and set it down gently. "You didn't have to come back," she said, leaning against the counter. "I'm just a cashier." "That's the thing," he said, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "You're not just anything. You saw something in me I hadn't seen in myself in years." She looked away for a moment as if weighing her words. "My dad always said people wear masks without knowing it. Not to hide from others, but from themselves," he nodded. "I think I've been wearing mine so long I forgot it wasn't my face." She pulled up a chair across from him, glancing at the closed sign on the door. 10 more minutes before I lock up." "Talk fast," he laughed quietly. "Fair enough." He told her everything. About the deal, the fake tech, the shell companies, the board members with hidden stakes. He didn't brag about stopping it. He spoke like a man who'd narrowly avoided stepping off a cliff and was still shaking. "And the worst part?" he said, staring into his coffee. "I almost didn't listen. Not to you, not to the data, just to that little voice inside that said, 'Wait, something's off.' I ignored it because I wanted to believe I was still sharp. Still in control." Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My dad lost everything the same way." He looked up. He trusted a partner. A friend, really. They were going to launch a magic school together. Teach kids real illusions, not just tricks. The paperwork looked perfect. The bank loved it. Everyone said it was a sure thing. She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of an empty sugar jar. But Dad kept having this feeling. Like the numbers were too neat. Like his partner was too eager to sign. He asked questions, but the answers came too fast, too smooth. So he pushed it down, said he was being silly. That real magicians don't doubt, they perform. Her voice dropped. 6 months after opening, the partner vanished. Took all the startup money, left Dad with debt, lawsuits, and a classroom full of disappointed kids. The billionaire felt a lump in his throat. What did he do? He didn't give up. But he changed. Started teaching small workshops in community centers. No fancy stage, no big promises, just honesty. He'd tell kids, the trick isn't in the hand, it's in the heart. If your heart's not in it, the audience will know. She looked at him. People feel truth even when they can't explain it. He sat back, absorbing her words. It wasn't about being smart or powerful. It was about being present. About caring enough to look beyond the surface. I keep thinking, he said slowly, that leadership is about making bold moves, but maybe it's really about having the courage to pause. Exactly, she said. Magic fails when the magician's more worried about applause than the craft. Business fails when the leader's more worried about the headline than the people. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain tap against the windows. Outside, the streetlights cast long reflections on the wet pavement. Inside, the shop felt like a sanctuary, small, warm, real. You know, he said after a while, I've spent my whole life building something that looks unshakable from the outside. But inside, it's full of shortcuts, assumptions, blind spots. I thought success meant never showing doubt. But maybe real strength is admitting you don't have all the answers. Maya nodded. My dad says the best illusions are the ones that make you question what you thought was real. Maybe that's what you needed. A little illusion to break the bigger one. He smiled. You're wiser than most people twice your age. I've just been watching, she said simply. Watching people rush, pretend, perform. And I wonder, what are they so afraid of missing that they can't just be? Her question hung in the air like steam from the coffee pot. Before he left, he asked, do you ever think about doing something beyond this? Not that there's anything wrong with it, but you've got a mind that sees things others miss. She shrugged. I'm in school. Business ethics, actually, part-time. It's slow going, but I want to understand how good people end up making bad choices, and how to stop it before it happens. He didn't say anything right away. Then quietly, would you ever consider working somewhere that's trying to do better? She raised an eyebrow. Like your company? Like a new team I'm thinking of building. One that asks the hard questions before the deal gets signed. One that listens to the quiet voices. She studied him for a long moment. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything. She didn't say yes. Didn't say no. Just nodded slowly, as if filing the idea away for later. When he stood to leave, she walked him to the door. Don't forget, she said as he stepped out into the rain. The wrong trick isn't the one that fails. It's the one you keep doing even after you know it's wrong. He turned back. I won't. And for the first time in years, he meant it. The next morning, he called a meeting, not with executives, but with junior analysts, compliance officers, even a few interns. He gathered them in a small conference room, no fancy tech, just chairs and a whiteboard. I need your help, he began, surprising them all. I almost made a huge mistake. Because I stopped listening to the people who see things I don't. I want to fix that. He laid out his idea, a new internal unit, small, independent, reporting directly to him. Their job wouldn't be to approve deals, but to challenge them, to ask the uncomfortable questions, to look for the cracks others ignore. One young woman raised her hand. Won't people see us as troublemakers? Maybe, he said. But if we're doing our job right, we'll save the company from itself. And that's not trouble, that's trust. By the end of the week, the team had a name. The Red Team. Not because they were enemies, but because in military exercises, the Red Team plays the adversary to test the strength of the plan. Their motto, suggested by a quiet intern who rarely spoke in meetings, see what's hidden, say what's true. Meanwhile, the fallout from the canceled deal continued. Nexicor's CEO gave an interview calling Viridian risk-averse and out of touch. But then, quietly, the university in Finland went public with their plagiarism claim. Tech blogs picked it up. Within days, Nexicor's website went dark. Their social media accounts vanished. The shell company dissolved. The truth had a way of surfacing, even when people tried to bury it. Back at Viridian, the billionaire made another change. He started walking the halls, not just the executive floor but engineering, customer support, even the mailroom. He asked people what they saw, what they worried about, what they wished leadership knew. Most were nervous at first, but when he actually listened, when he took notes, followed up, acted on suggestions, they began to open up. One engineer told him about a product flaw they'd reported months ago that got ignored because it wasn't a priority. He fixed it within a week. A customer service rep shared how scripts forced them to sound robotic, hurting real connections with users. He scrapped the scripts and gave them freedom to speak like humans. It wasn't glamorous work. No press releases. No stock spikes. But it felt real. And through it all, he kept thinking about Maya, not as a savior, but as a mirror. She hadn't changed his life. She'd helped him remember who he already was beneath the titles and the pressure. One afternoon, he stopped by Haven Brews again. Not for coffee, just to check in. She was restocking cups when he walked in. This time, she didn't seem surprised. "You're becoming a regular," she said with a small smile. "Maybe I like the view," he replied. They talked for a few minutes, about her classes, his new team, the rain that wouldn't let up. Before he left, he handed her a plain envelope. "What's this?" she asked, "just something to think about." No pressure. No expectations. She opened it later after her shift. Inside was a job offer, not for a fancy title but for a role on the red team. Lead analyst, ethical due diligence. The salary was generous, the responsibilities clear, and at the bottom in handwritten ink, "You already know how to see. Now help us learn." She didn't accept right away. She thought about it for days. Talked to her dad, researched the company's recent changes, watched interviews where the CEO spoke about humility, listening, course correction. Finally, she called. "I'll do it," she said, "but on one condition. Name it. That this team never becomes just another box to check. That we stay small, stay sharp, and stay honest even when it's hard." There was a pause on the other end. Then quietly, "That's the only way I'll keep you." She smiled. "Good." As she hung up, she looked out her window at the city. The same city where billions changed hands in seconds, where empires rose and fell on a single decision. And she realized something. Real change didn't always come from the top. Sometimes it started with a wrong trick. A quiet word and the courage to say, "Wait, that doesn't feel right." And sometimes that was enough to shift everything. The morning of the emergency board meeting arrived with a heavy sky and a heavier silence in the executive suite. The billionaire sat alone in the conference room, a single folder resting on the polished table in front of him. It wasn't thick, just 20 pages printed on plain white paper, no glossy cover, no corporate branding. But inside those pages was enough to unravel everything. Forged documents, hidden ownership trails, plagiarized code, and emails that showed clear coordination between two board members and the now-vanished Nexicor team. He hadn't slept, not because he was afraid, but because he finally understood the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't just about canceling a deal anymore. It was about calling out people who'd sat across from him for years, shared meals, toasted to shared vision, all while steering the company toward a trap they'd helped build. At precisely 8 a.m., the board members began to arrive. Some looked annoyed, others confused. One, the chairman, walked in with a tight smile and said, "Let's make this quick. Markets open in an hour." The billionaire didn't greet them with pleasantries. He simply stood, walked to the head of the table, and placed a copy of the folder in front of each person. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I need you to read this." Murmurs rose. Pages turned. Faces changed. The chairman's smile vanished by page 3. By page 7, his knuckles were white around his pen. Another board member, a woman who'd championed the Nexicor deal, looked up, stunned. "Where did you get this?" "From people who still believe in this company," he replied. "From engineers who refused to lie. From legal teams who followed the money. From a university that wouldn't let their work be stolen in silence." He paused, letting the truth settle like dust after a storm. "What you're holding," he continued, "is proof that Nexicor was never what it claimed to be. Its technology was copied. Its revenue was fabricated. And the entity behind most of its funding, Oceanic Horizon, was created specifically to funnel money back to insiders who stood to profit from our acquisition. He looked directly at the chairman. Including you. The room went still. No one breathed. The chairman leaned forward, voice low and sharp. This is a misunderstanding. Those investments were personal. Disclosed in my annual filings. Not the ones tied to the shell company that paid Nexicor's consultants, including your cousin, who happens to be their so-called CFO, the billionaire said evenly. And not the email you sent last month saying, once Viridian bites were golden. A few board members exchanged glances. One cleared his throat. Is this verified? Every document is time-stamped, notarized, and backed by third-party forensic analysis, the billionaire said. I didn't want to believe it either. But the evidence doesn't care what I want. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the woman who'd supported the deal quietly closed her folder. I had no idea, she said. I trusted the due diligence reports. And that's the problem, he said gently. We all trusted the surface. We stopped asking who was behind the curtain. He turned to the group. I called this meeting not to assign blame, though accountability will come, but to decide what kind of company we want to be moving forward. Do we sweep this under the rug to protect reputations? Or do we face it head-on even if it hurts? Silence again. Then slowly, one by one, the board members began to speak, not in defense but in reflection. One admitted he'd ignored red flags because the projected returns were too good to pass up. Another confessed he'd assumed someone else had vetted the tech. They weren't villains. Just human. Tired, distracted, tempted by the illusion of easy success. Only the chairman remained silent, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the table. Finally, the billionaire said, Here's what I propose. We issue a public statement, full transparency. We terminate all ties with Nexicor and Oceanic Horizon. We launch an internal ethics review, led by our new red team. And we refer all findings to the appropriate authorities. He looked at the chairman. You'll be asked to step down from the board, effective immediately. Your shares will be frozen pending investigation. If you cooperate, we'll handle this with discretion. If not, the courts will. The chairman stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. You think you're the hero here? You're just protecting your own legacy. No. The billionaire said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I'm protecting the people who work here. The customers who trust us. The truth. That's not legacy. That's responsibility. The chairman left without another word. The rest of the meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, they'd agreed on every point. Not because they wanted to, but because they finally saw what was at stake. Not just money, but meaning. Later that day, the press release went out. Short. Direct. No spin. Viridian Dynamics has terminated its proposed acquisition of Nexicor, Technologies following discovery of material misrepresentations in technology, claims and financial disclosures. 2 board members have been placed on administrative review. The company is cooperating fully with regulatory authorities and has initiated a company-wide ethics reinforcement program. Within minutes, news outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Some called it courageous. Others called it a cover-up. But inside Viridian, something quieter was happening. Employees gathered in break rooms not to gossip, but to talk. For the first time, they felt like leadership wasn't hiding. Like someone was finally willing to say, we messed up. Now we're fixing it. That evening, the billionaire didn't go home. He walked through the office floors, engineering, design, customer support, and listened. People stopped him in hallways. Not to complain, but to thank him. A young developer said, I reported a bug in their demo code months ago. No one listened. Now I feel like my voice matters. A finance analyst admitted. I thought I was the only one who thought the numbers looked too clean. He realized then that the real damage from the near miss wasn't financial. It was trust. And trust, once broken, could only be rebuilt one honest conversation at a time. The next morning, he received a call from the head of the red team, the young woman from the coffee shop. She'd officially started the week before, and already, her team had uncovered 3 more questionable vendor contracts using similar shell structures. We need to expand the audit, she said. This wasn't just one bad deal. It's a pattern, he agreed immediately. Do whatever you need. Budget, access, time, I'll clear the path. As they talked, he noticed something new in her voice. Not just intelligence, but authority. She wasn't just pointing out problems. She was building solutions. Later that week, she presented her findings to the executive team. No jargon, no fluff, just clear facts, timelines, and recommendations. When one senior VP pushed back saying, "This will slow us down," she didn't argue. She simply asked, "Would you rather move fast toward the wrong destination?" The room fell silent. The VP nodded slowly. Point taken. That night, the billionaire sat in his office again, but this time the weight felt different. Lighter, not because the problems were gone, but because he wasn't carrying them alone. He had a team now, not just of execs and advisors, but of people who cared more about truth than titles. He thought about the chairman, now gone. He didn't feel anger, just sadness, because the man had forgotten that real power isn't in controlling the narrative, it's in serving something bigger than yourself. A few days later, federal investigators contacted Veridian. They'd opened a formal inquiry into Nexicor and its network of shell companies. Veridian's full cooperation, along with the detailed evidence provided by the Red Team, accelerated the case. Within weeks, charges were filed. The so-called CEO of Nexicor was arrested at an airport, trying to leave the country. The shell companies were frozen. Stolen funds began to be traced back to their sources, but the billionaire didn't celebrate. He knew justice wasn't a headline, it was a process, and healing took longer than exposure. One afternoon, he invited the Red Team to lunch, not in the executive dining room, but at a simple deli downtown. Over sandwiches and iced tea, they talked about more than work. They shared stories about parents who taught them honesty, about times they'd stayed silent when they should have spoken up, about why they chose ethics over ease. The young woman from the coffee shop sat across from him, no longer nervous, no longer just a cashier, but a leader in her own right. "You know," she said, stirring her tea, "my dad always said the hardest trick to master isn't the flashy one. It's the one where you make someone feel seen." He looked at her. "You've done that for all of us," she smiled. "I just reminded you to look." As they walked back to the office, the city buzzed around them. Cars, chatter, life moving fast. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel rushed. He felt present, grounded, human. Because real change didn't happen in boardrooms or press releases. It happened in quiet moments when someone dared to say, "That's the wrong trick," and someone else had the courage to listen. 6 months later, the city felt different, not because it had changed, but because he was seeing it with new eyes. The same streets, the same buildings, the same rush of people, but now he noticed the small things. The barista who remembered a regular's order, the delivery driver who paused to help someone pick up dropped groceries, the quiet hum of ordinary people doing their best. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. Inside Veridian Dynamics, the shift was just as quiet but deeper. The Red Team had grown, not in size, but in influence. They weren't a department people feared anymore. They were the ones colleagues sought out before sending a proposal, saying, "Can you take a look? I want to get this right." Their motto, "See what's hidden, say what's true," was now printed on lanyards, not as a slogan, but as a promise. The young woman who'd once stood behind the counter at Haven Brews now led that team. She hadn't changed her style, still direct, still kind, still unimpressed by titles. But she'd found her voice, and with it, a quiet power that came not from authority but from integrity. One morning she walked into the executive wing, not to report a crisis, but to share good news. A new partnership with a clean energy startup had passed Red Team review with flying colors. "Their tech is solid," she said, handing over a file. "Their team is transparent, and they turned down a bigger offer because they believed in our values." The billionaire smiled. "That's the kind of deal worth making," she nodded. "It's not about the money. It's about who you become while earning it." He kept that sentence in his notebook. Later that day, he visited the company's new ethics training center, a space designed not for lectures but for conversation. Round tables, soft lighting, walls covered in quotes from employees about moments they chose honesty over convenience. In one corner, a screen played short videos. A customer service rep admitting a mistake and fixing it, an engineer flagging a safety concern before launch, a junior analyst questioning a vendor's unusually low bid. This wasn't PR. It was practice. Practice in being human. That evening, he found himself walking past Haven Brews again. The shop was still there, still warm, still serving coffee to students, office workers, and dreamers. He didn't go in, Maya no longer worked there, but he paused outside, watching the light spill onto the sidewalk. He remembered the day she'd said, "That's the wrong trick," and how those 4 words had unraveled a $200 million illusion. He never would have guessed that a moment of impatience at a coffee counter would lead to boardroom reckonings, federal investigations, and a company-wide renewal. But life rarely announces its turning points with fanfare. Sometimes it whispers them in the middle of an ordinary day. Back at his office, he opened an email from the scholarship committee. Thanks to a new initiative funded by Viridian, 10 service industry workers, including 2 baristas from Haven Brews, had just been awarded full tuition for business and ethics programs. The program was called Clear Sight, and its mission was simple: help people who see the world clearly get the tools to change it. He approved the next round of funding without hesitation. A few days later, he attended a small gathering at a community college, not as a CEO but as a guest. The room was filled with students in their 20s and 30s, many working full-time jobs, some with kids at home, all determined to learn. When he spoke, he didn't talk about stock prices or market share. He talked about doubt, about listening, about the courage it takes to say, "I don't know," or "Wait, that doesn't feel right." Afterward, a young man approached him holding a coffee cup. "My sister works at Haven Brews," he said. "She told me about you, said you came in one day looking like the world was on your shoulders, and left like you remembered how to breathe." The billionaire chuckled. She was right. She also said you hired her friend, the one who called out your trick. He grinned. "Guess that means there's hope for the rest of us." "There's always hope," he replied. "Especially when we pay attention to the people who aren't trying to impress us, just to help us see." The next week, Viridian announced its first Ethics in Action Award, given to employees who demonstrated quiet courage in everyday decisions. The first recipient was a warehouse supervisor who'd refused to ship a product with a minor, but potentially dangerous flaw, even though it would delay a major client order. When asked why, he'd said, "Because someone's kid might use this. I wouldn't want it in my own home." The billionaire presented the award himself. No cameras, no press. Just a handshake, a certificate, and a promise. "We've got your back." Meanwhile, the fallout from the Nexicor scandal had settled into history. The fraudulent company was gone. The shell networks dismantled. The 2 former board members faced civil penalties and were barred from serving on public company boards for 5 years. There were no jail sentences. White-collar crime rarely ended that way, but reputations were ruined. And that in some ways was its own justice. More importantly, Viridian stock had not only recovered, it had climbed higher than before. Not because of a flashy acquisition, but because investors now trusted the company's judgment. Analysts called it the integrity premium. The billionaire called it doing the right thing and letting the rest follow. One rainy afternoon, he sat in the office kitchen, making himself a cup of coffee. The machine beeped. He reached for the counter and almost tapped his finger twice out of habit. He caught himself just in time, smiled, then placed the cup down gently without a sound. A moment later, Maya walked in, holding a stack of reports. She saw him standing there, hand hovering over the counter, and raised an eyebrow. "Still the wrong trick?" she asked. He shook his head. "Now it's just coffee." She laughed, the same easy laugh he'd heard behind the counter months ago. "Good, because the best things in life don't need a signal. They just are." They sat together at a small table by the window, sipping coffee, watching the rain. No agenda, no urgency. Just 2 people who'd learned, through a series of small choices, that leadership wasn't about being the smartest in the room. It was about creating a room where everyone felt safe to speak up. Later, she handed him a proposal. Not for a deal, not for a product, but for a new mentorship program, pairing Viridian executives with students from underfunded schools. "Let them see that success isn't just about climbing," she said. "It's about reaching back." He signed off on it before she even finished explaining. As the months turned into a year, the changes became part of the company's rhythm. New hires were onboarded not just with handbooks, but with stories, like the one about the cashier who saw what the CEO missed. It wasn't told as a fairy tale, but as a reminder. Wisdom doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears an apron, and the billionaire, he still made decisions, still faced pressure, still had days when doubt crept in. But now, when he felt the old urge to rush, to perform, to prove, he'd pause. take a breath. Ask himself, am I listening? Or just waiting to talk? Most days he got it right. One evening, long after hours, he stayed late to review a proposal for a new AI ethics council. As he read, he noticed a footnote citing research from the same Finnish university, whose work had been stolen by Nexacore. This time, Viridian was partnering with them openly, funding their lab, sharing credit. Full circle. He closed the file, turned off his desk lamp, and walked out into the quiet hallway. The building was empty except for the soft hum of servers and the occasional security guard nodding as he passed. Outside, the city glowed, alive, messy, imperfect. He didn't feel like a savior. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt like a person who'd been given a second chance to do better, and that was more than enough. The next morning, he arrived early. Not to check emails, but to sit in the main lobby and watch employees come in, laughing, tired, focused, hopeful. He saw the red team member who'd once been a night shift barista now walking in with a badge and a purpose. He saw the engineer who'd spoken up about the bug now leading a project. He saw a company not defined by one near disaster, but by its willingness to learn from it.